You believed they felt nothing, that in the moment they hurt you, walked away, or went silent, there was simply an absence where their heart should have been. You replayed it endlessly, searching for evidence of remorse in their eyes, in their words, in the cold efficiency with which they severed the bond, and you found nothing. So you concluded what anyone would conclude. They didn't care. They never cared. You were alone in your love, and the pain you carry now is yours to bear in isolation because they moved on without a backward glance. But what if I told you that assumption, that fundamental belief about what happened inside them, is the very thing keeping you imprisoned in this wound? What if their silence was not evidence of emptiness, but of something far more complex, far more tragic, and in a strange way, far more human than you ever imagined? Hi, I'm Roman, and I'll be your guide into the human psyche today, and precisely into the avoidance mind. The avoidant does not escape pain, they exile it. There is a profound difference between these two mechanisms, and understanding this difference will change everything about how you see what happened between you. When they hurt you and disappeared into that impenetrable silence, they were not celebrating their freedom. They were enacting the only survival strategy their psyche knows, a strategy so deeply embedded in their unconscious architecture that to deviate from it would feel like annihilation itself. This is very important to understand. The avoidant is fighting for survival. Carl Jung understood that the human psyche cannot simply delete emotional reality. It can only relocate it. What the conscious mind refuses to acknowledge does not vanish. It descends into the shadow, that vast underground territory of the psyche where all the exiled parts of ourselves continue to live, to breathe, to influence our behavior from behind the curtain of awareness. The avoidant has constructed their entire identity on a single terrifying premise learned in childhood. Emotional need equals abandonment. Vulnerability equals annihilation. To reach for love is to guarantee its withdrawal. Imagine being a child and learning through 1,000 small betrayals that when you cry, you are left alone longer. That when you express fear, the very people meant to comfort you grow cold, impatient, dismissive. That your emotional existence is a burden others will not carry. The child's psyche, brilliant in its adaptation, makes a decision. It will stop feeling, or more accurately, it will stop knowing that it feels. This is not a conscious choice. This is the ego constructing a defensive structure so sophisticated that the person themselves believes the fortress is their true self. The avoidant learns to equate independence with survival, emotional distance with safety, and the suppression of need with strength. But here is what you must understand. The feelings do not disappear. The need for connection does not evaporate. The capacity for love does not atrophy. All of it remains, buried in the unconscious, where it continues to exert enormous pressure on their behavior, their choices, their relationships, without ever being consciously recognized. There is a struggle in their mind, on one side, their profound desire for love and connection, and on the other, love and connection means vulnerability. And their whole psyche was built around avoiding this vulnerability. So when they hurt you, when they withdrew or said those cutting words or vanished into silence, what were they actually feeling? The immediate aftermath was not relief. It was dissociation, a psychological numbing so complete that they themselves believed they felt nothing. This is the avoidant's most perfected defense. The ability to sever from their own emotional reality so swiftly, so thoroughly, that they can look you in the eye and genuinely not know they are in pain. But beneath that frozen surface, beneath the calm mask of indifference, something else was happening. There was a guilt so profound, so intolerable, that it could not be named. Jung called this kind of shame the shadow's deepest inhabitant. It lives in the psyche as a formless dread, a sense that something is fundamentally wrong with them, that their very nature is toxic, that to be truly known is to be rejected. When they hurt you, this shadow guilt activated with devastating force. But because their entire psychological structure is built on not feeling, they could not process it. They could only bury it deeper. And so they entered what I call the recursive loop. In the privacy of their own mind, often in the middle of the night when defenses are weakest, they replayed the moments of your pain. They saw your face. They heard your voice breaking. They felt the weight of what they had done. But in the very same moment, another mechanism activated, and this mechanism will shatter everything you think about the avoidant attachment style. This fits my story and some of my friends. But what about your story? Does this description fit a pattern you encountered? Let me know in the comments. The projection. They began to rewrite the narrative, not consciously, not with malicious intent, but as an automatic defense against ego collapse. You became too needy. You wanted too much. You were suffocating them. You didn't understand their need for space. The story shifted until they were no longer the one who inflicted harm, but the one who had to protect themselves from your excessive demands. This is not cruelty. This is survival. The avoidant psyche cannot hold both truths simultaneously. I hurt someone I loved, and I am a good person. The cognitive dissonance would shatter the ego structure they have spent a lifetime building. So the psyche chooses. It sacrifices the truth to preserve the self. This is crucial to understand. You are not the person they are describing. They are projecting their own fears and unresolved neurosis onto you. And this understanding really helped me at a personal level. So let's dive more deeply into what happens precisely, because most people that haven't lived it really get it wrong. This is what most people get wrong about the avoidant. They grieve deeply, profoundly, in ways they themselves cannot access or articulate. There is a mourning that happens in the unconscious, a soul-level recognition that something sacred was lost. They miss you. They think about you. They wonder what you are doing, whether you have moved on, whether you think of them. But this grief is locked behind a door they do not have the key to open. To feel it fully would require them to acknowledge that they need love, that they are vulnerable, that they are capable of being hurt. And this acknowledgement is the very thing their entire psychological system was designed to prevent. So the grief remains unfelt, unprocessed, a phantom pain that influences everything while being consciously recognized as nothing. I had a long personal conversation with an avoidant, and you would not believe what's going on in their mind. Guilt, shame. But it comes as bursts in the middle of the night driving to work. Suddenly, a strong feeling of stress and anxiety runs into the avoidant's vein until what feels like poison reaches their heart. This is a clear symptom of the mask shattering, of the story they told themselves breaking down. But there's something else you need to understand. There's a deeper level to this. The avoidant unconsciously seeks partners who will pursue them. This is not accidental. At a level beneath conscious awareness, they are attempting to recreate the original wound. The childhood dynamic where love was conditional, where they had to perform independence to receive any attention at all. They choose partners, often anxiously attached partners, who will chase them, who will tolerate distance, who will work hard to earn their affection. This recreates the familiar pattern and allows them to maintain their defense structure. But something happened that they did not anticipate. You stopped chasing. Maybe you finally exhausted yourself. Maybe you woke up to the pattern. Maybe you chose yourself. But in that moment when you withdrew your pursuit, when you stopped trying to reach them across the distance they created, their entire psychological defense system destabilized. Because the unconscious contract they needed, someone who would keep trying despite their withdrawal, was broken. And paradoxically, this is when the deepest terror activated. Not when you were close, but when you finally left. What they felt after hurting you was not simple or singular. It was a chaos of contradictions, relief and panic, freedom and loss, vindication and guilt, numbness and unbearable pain. All of it happening simultaneously in different layers of the psyche, most of it never reaching conscious awareness. They hurt you not because you meant nothing, but because you meant everything, and that was unbearable. The soul-level betrayal was this. They needed your love desperately, but their shadow could only receive it as poison, as threat, as the very thing that would destroy them if they let it in. Why does understanding this change everything? Because the moment you realize they were not indifferent, but imprisoned, something fundamental shifts in your psyche. You stop interpreting their abandonment as evidence of your inadequacy and begin to see it for what it truly was, a collision between your capacity for intimacy and their terror of annihilation. This is not about excusing their behavior. This is about liberating yourself from the false narrative that you were not enough. You were not rejected because you lacked value. You encountered someone whose psychological architecture could not metabolize love without experiencing it as existential threat. The difference between these two interpretations is the difference between remaining haunted and becoming whole. For months, perhaps years, you have carried a question in the depths of your being. Did they ever feel anything? Did hurting me cost them anything at all? And the silence you received in return felt like an answer. It felt like proof that you alone carried the weight of what was lost. But silence is not evidence of absence. Silence is evidence of repression. What the avoidant cannot speak, they exile into the shadow. What they cannot consciously acknowledge, they experience as somatic disturbance, as vague unease, as dreams they cannot quite remember, as sudden moments of inexplicable grief that surface and then vanish before they can be named. Jung understood that the psyche does not forget. It merely redistributes what consciousness refuses to hold. The avoidance defense mechanism operates like a psychological airbag. The moment intimacy threatens to breach their defenses, the entire system deploys to prevent ego collapse. They do not consciously choose to hurt you. Their shadow chooses for them. And in that moment of rupture, when they pulled away or went cold or disappeared entirely, they were not experiencing relief. They were experiencing what Jung called dissociation, a fragmenting of consciousness that allows the ego to survive what it believes would otherwise destroy it. The part of them that cared for you, that felt connection, that recognized your value, that part did not vanish. It was sealed behind a psychological wall so thick that even they cannot access it without risking the collapse of their entire defensive structure. What we are doing together here is what is called active imagination. This is a process Carl Jung created in order to help us access the depths of our psyche. While I'm speaking, you are probably imagining a personal relationship you lived, and you are looking at it with a new eye. For me, doing this process, I was seeing my relationship from the sky. It seemed like being in a helicopter and watching years of relationship unfold. How does it feel for you? How do you see it? I'm so curious, and your thoughts and experiences are very important to help me define active imagination better. I need your mind here, so tell me how it works for you in the comments. Back to the avoidant archetype. What happens in the silence after they leave is not what you imagine. You picture them moving on effortlessly, perhaps already with someone new, feeling nothing, regretting nothing. But the avoidant's internal experience is far more complex and far more tortured than their external presentation suggests. In the weeks and months following the rupture, they exist in a state Jung would recognize as psychological purgatory. The conscious mind maintains the narrative. I had to leave. They were too much. I need my freedom. I made the right choice. But the unconscious tells a different story. It speaks in symptoms, insomnia, irritability, a vague sense of loss they cannot attach to any specific object. Dreams where you appear, not as you were, but as symbol, as anima, as the rejected feminine principle now haunting them from within. The delayed emotional processing that characterizes avoidant attachment is not cruelty, it is developmental arrest. Where secure individuals can feel, process, and integrate emotion in real time, avoidants experience a temporal lag. The grief comes later, sometimes months later, sometimes years. And when it finally surfaces, it arrives with such intensity that their only option is to bury it again or risk complete psychological dissolution. This is why some avoidants suddenly reach out long after the relationship has ended. Not because they finally realized your worth, but because their defenses temporarily weakened and the repressed material broke through. But here's what you must understand. Even when they feel it, even when the grief finally reaches consciousness, they remain paralyzed. The same mechanism that prevented them from staying prevents them from returning. The shame is too great, the fear too primal. They stand at the edge of reconnection and their entire nervous system screams danger. You remember my long conversation with an avoidant? That's exactly what happened to them when going to work in their car, months after the end of the relationship. But this goes even deeper. The avoidant carries within them what Jung called the wounded child archetype. This is not metaphor. This is structural reality within the psyche. At some point in their early development, they learned that expressing need led to abandonment, that showing vulnerability invited rejection, that love was conditional upon their ability to not need it. And so the child within them made a decision, a soul-level contract with their own survival. I will never need anyone again. I will become invulnerable. I will exile my dependency into the shadow where it can never betray me. This decision saved them then. It destroys their relationships now. And the tragedy is that they cannot simply choose differently. The wounded child does not respond to logic or willpower. It responds only to safety, and intimacy feels like the opposite of safety. When you loved them, you were unconsciously trying to reach that wounded child, to show them that vulnerability would not lead to annihilation, that they could be seen and still be safe. But the wounded child did not experience your love as reassurance. It experienced it as confirmation of its worst fear. You see me. You know I need you. Now you have the power to destroy me. And so the defense system activated, not against you, but against the terror of being known. Every time you moved closer, the wounded child retreated further. Every time you offered more love, the shadow interpreted it as greater danger. You were not fighting their indifference. You were fighting their trauma. And trauma does not yield to love alone. It yields only to conscious integration, to the painstaking work of bringing the shadow into the light. And most avoidants never do this work. Some avoidants do eventually recognize the pattern, usually after multiple relationships have ended the same way, usually after the loneliness becomes more painful than the fear. They begin to see their role in the destruction. They begin to notice how they sabotage connection, how they create distance, how they abandon others before they can be abandoned. This recognition is the first crack in the defense system. But recognition alone does not heal. Many avoidants remain trapped in what Jung called the state of awareness without transformation. They see the pattern but cannot break it. They understand intellectually that their behavior destroys relationships, but the somatic reality, the body's conviction that intimacy equals danger, remains unchanged. Knowledge without integration is merely suffering with consciousness. True healing for an avoidant requires something most are unwilling to do. It requires them to turn toward the very thing they have spent their entire life avoiding: their own need, their own vulnerability, their own terror of abandonment. It requires them to feel the feelings they have been outrunning since childhood, to grieve the love they rejected, to sit with the shame of having hurt people who only wanted to care for them, to dismantle the false self they constructed and meet the frightened child underneath. This is shadow work in its most demanding form, and it cannot be done while in relationship. It cannot be done to win someone back. It must be done in solitude, in therapeutic space, in the dark night of the soul where no one is watching and there is no reward except the possibility of becoming whole. But here is what matters most for you. Their healing is not your responsibility. Their integration is not your mission, and your freedom does not depend on them ever doing this work. You must now turn the lens inward and ask the question that truly matters. What in you was drawn to someone emotionally unavailable? This is not about blame. This is about excavating the unconscious patterns that led you into this dynamic. Because if you do not do this work, you will find yourself in the same situation with a different face. The avoidant you loved was not an accident. They were a mirror reflecting back an unintegrated part of your own psyche. Jung taught that we do not attract people randomly. We attract the carriers of our own unconscious material. If you found yourself drawn to someone who could not fully meet you, you must ask what part of you was afraid of being fully met. If you stayed long after it became clear they could not give you what you needed, you must ask what wound in you was being fed by the deprivation. Many who love avoidance are themselves running from intimacy, just in a different form. The anxious pursuit, the constant reaching, the focus on the other person's unavailability, all of it can be a sophisticated defense against your own terror of true vulnerability. As long as you are chasing someone who cannot be caught, you never have to risk being fully seen yourself. This is the shadow work required of you now. To dialogue with the part of yourself that chose this person. to understand what psychological need was being met by loving someone unavailable, to recognize the ways you abandoned yourself while focusing on their abandonment of you. Jung's technique of active imagination is powerful here. You sit in meditation and invite the internalized image of the avoidant to appear, not the real person, but the psychic image you carry. And you speak to them. You ask them what they represent, what part of you they embody, what they were teaching you about yourself. And if you listen deeply, the answer will come not from them, but from your own unconscious, revealing the hidden architecture of your own wounding.